You see the white jumpsuit. You hear the voice. You think of Graceland, Las Vegas, and a sneer that changed the world. Elvis Presley was more than a singer. He was a cultural atom bomb. But what happens when the bomb goes off in an empty room? What did the most famous man on the planet do when nobody was watching? He had everything. Money, fame, cars, women. He could buy a city block on a whim. He could fly to Denver for a sandwich. So why was he so strange? Why did he collect police badges like a kid collects baseball cards? Why did he shoot his televisions? The image of the king is solid gold, but the man behind it was a collection of bizarre habits, deep-seated fears, and obsessions that governed his private kingdom. We know about the music. We know about the movies. We don't talk about the chimp. We don't talk about the one-way mirrors. We don't talk about the books he read until the pages fell out, searching for answers to questions he couldn't even articulate. These weren't just quirks. They were windows. They show us a man who was profoundly lonely, deeply spiritual, and desperately trying to control a life that had spun completely out of his control. What was he really looking for in those late quiet hours at Graceland? Number 17. Why did he need a chimpanzee named Scatter? Elvis Presley owned a chimpanzee. His name was Scatter. This wasn't a cute, fleeting pet. This was a full-blown member of the inner circle, a furry agent of chaos that reflected the strange world Elvis had built around himself. The chimp arrived in the early 1960s, a gift from a friend. He had a background in television, appearing on a local Memphis show hosted by a man named Captain Bill Killebrew. He was trained to perform, he was smart, and he was a menace. At Graceland, Scatter had free reign. He was dressed in custom-made suits. He learned to mimic the guys in Elvis's entourage, the Memphis Mafia. He would sit with them, ride in cars with them, and cause absolute havoc. Lamar Fike, one of the core members of Elvis's crew, often told stories about the chimp. Scatter loved to pull up women's skirts. He would crash parties. He would throw things. Elvis found this endlessly amusing. He would roar with laughter as Scatter terrorized his guests or his employees. The chimp was a living practical joke, a constant source of unpredictable entertainment in a life that was becoming increasingly regimented and predictable. The obsession went beyond just having a funny animal around. Elvis seemed to enjoy the disruption Scatter represented. When you are the king, everyone says yes. Everyone is polite. Everyone is on their best behavior. The chimp didn't care who Elvis was. He operated on pure impulse. In a way, Scatter was more free than Elvis ever could be. He could do the outrageous things Elvis probably wished he could do. He could break the tension. He could make the king feel like a regular guy watching a crazy animal. This need for a court jester speaks volumes. Life on the road. And at Graceland was a bubble. It was the same faces, the same routines, the same pressures. Scatter was a grenade thrown into that bubble, but the stories also have a darker edge. The chimp was known to be aggressive. He bit people. His antics weren't always harmless fun. The responsibility for Scatter often fell to the Memphis Mafia, who had to clean up his messes, literally and figuratively. They had to deal with the fallout when he went too far. Elvis could laugh from a distance, insulated from the real consequences. Eventually, Scatter's behavior became too much. The stories of his final days are murky. Some say he was sent to a sanctuary, others say he was given away. Priscilla Presley wrote in her 1985 book, Elvis and Me, that Scatter became so vicious he was eventually retired to a climate-controlled room at Graceland, living out his days in a cage. The joke had stopped being funny. The symbol of chaotic freedom had become a prisoner, just like his owner. Final notes. Did Scatter's chaotic energy mirror the growing chaos in Elvis's own mind? Was the chimp a substitute for the genuine, unpredictable human connections he could no longer trust? And what really happened to Scatter in the end, when the king simply grew tired of his toy? Number 16. What was his obsession with law enforcement badges? Elvis collected police badges. He didn't just have a few, he had an extensive and very real collection of badges, uniforms, and police equipment from departments all over the country. This wasn't a casual hobby, it was a deep, driving passion that led him to some strange places, including a surprise visit to President Richard Nixon at the White House. It started in the 1950s. Elvis had always admired law enforcement. He saw police officers as symbols of authority, respect, and power. They were the good guys. As his fame grew, he started receiving honorary badges from police chiefs and sheriffs who were fans. He would display them proudly, but He wanted more than just honorary trinkets. He wanted the real thing. He wanted to be one of them. He would use his fame to meet law enforcement officials wherever he went. So he would shower police departments with gifts, donations, cars, equipment. In return, he would often be made an honorary deputy or officer. He took these roles very seriously. He carried guns, he had a blue police light he would put on top of his car to pull people over, usually just to give them an autograph and a lecture about speeding. Jerry Schilling, a longtime friend, details many of these encounters in his book Me and a Guy Named Elvis. He describes how Elvis would study police procedure and talk for hours about law enforcement tactics. The peak of this obsession came on December 21st, 1970. Elvis, upset about the drug culture and anti-establishment sentiment in America, flew to Washington, D.C. on a whim. He handwrote a 6-page letter to President Nixon, offering his services to help fight the war on drugs. He wanted to be a federal agent at large. He hand-delivered the letter to a White House guard and, amazingly, managed to secure a meeting with the president. The official White House photo of Elvis and Nixon is one of the most requested images from the National Archives. During the meeting, Elvis showed Nixon his collection of police badges and asked for a badge from the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. He believed having a federal badge would allow him to carry his guns and narcotics, his prescription drugs, anywhere in the world legally. Nixon, clearly bemused by the whole situation, granted his request. Elvis left the White House with his prized federal badge. This wasn't just about playing cops and robbers. For Elvis, a badge was a symbol of legitimacy and control. He was the ultimate outsider, a rock and roller who had been condemned by the establishment in his youth. Now, he wanted to be the ultimate insider. He wanted the power to enforce the rules, not just break them. It was also a way to feel safe. Surrounded by security, carrying his own weapons, and holding an official badge, he could create a shield against a world he increasingly saw as dangerous and out of control. The irony, of course, was that while he was offering to fight the nation's drug problem, he was privately descending into his own devastating prescription drug addiction. Final notes. Did Elvis truly believe a federal badge could protect him from his own demons? Was his desire to be a cop a way of seeking approval from a father figure he never had? And how did his personal collection of prescription drugs square with his mission to become a federal narcotics agent in his own mind? Number 15. Why did he fill his shelves with spiritual books? Elvis Presley's bedroom at Graceland was not what you might expect. Next to the Bibles, you would find a library of books on religion, mysticism, and the occult. He was a seeker. He was on a lifelong quest for spiritual answers that went far beyond his traditional Christian upbringing. This wasn't a casual interest. He read voraciously. He underlined passages. He filled the margins with his own thoughts. His spiritual journey intensified after his mother Gladys died in 1958. He was devastated, and the simple answers of his childhood faith were not enough to quell his grief. He began searching for something more. When he was stationed in Germany with the U.S. Army, he started to explore different belief systems. This quest was later fueled by his hairdresser, Larry Geller, who joined Elvis's circle in 1964. Geller introduced him to a world of esoteric thought. The books he read were diverse and often obscure. He devoured The Impersonal Life by Joseph Benner, a book he loved so much he gave away hundreds of copies. He read Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda and works by the spiritualist Madame Blavatsky, founder of Theosophy. He was fascinated by numerology, the teachings of the Rosicrucians, and the Egyptian Book of the Dead. He would stay up all night reading these books aloud to the Memphis Mafia, trying to understand their meaning and how they applied to his life. He believed he had psychic powers. He practiced meditation and numerology. He believed in healing energies and would try to heal people by laying his hands on them. He saw signs and symbols everywhere. He was convinced that his life was guided by a higher purpose, and he was constantly looking for clues to what that purpose was. Peter Guralnick, in his definitive biography, Careless Love, The Unmaking of Elvis Presley, chronicles this spiritual searching in great detail, showing how it became a central and often isolating part of Elvis's life. This obsession was a source of conflict. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, hated it. He saw it as a distraction from making money. Priscilla grew concerned about the influence Geller and these books were having on him. At one point, Elvis's inner circle, led by his father Vernon and the Colonel, staged an intervention of sorts. They pressured Elvis to get rid of the books and distance himself from Geller. For a while, he did. He had a massive bonfire at Graceland and burned the books. But his curiosity never went away. He eventually returned to his spiritual studies, though perhaps more privately. This quest for meaning reveals a man who was deeply unsatisfied by material success. He had achieved a level of fame and wealth that was unimaginable, but it left him feeling empty. He was looking for a connection to something real, something eternal. He felt that his talent was a gift from God, and he was struggling to understand why he had been chosen. The spiritual books were his roadmap, his attempt to find a context for his extraordinary and often painful life. Final notes. If Elvis had found the spiritual peace he was looking for, would he have been able to escape his addictions? Did his all-night reading sessions and philosophical discussions alienate him further from the people around him? And in all those thousands of pages he read, did he ever find the one answer he was truly searching for? Number 14, what made him shoot his televisions? Elvis Presley had a habit of shooting things. Specifically, he had a habit of shooting television sets. This wasn't a one-time incident. It happened frequently enough at Graceland and in his hotel rooms in Las Vegas that it became a running joke among his staff. If a show or a performer on TV annoyed him, he would pull out one of his many handguns and blast the screen. The most famous story involves the singer Robert Goulet. Elvis was watching TV one night and Goulet appeared on the screen. For whatever reason, Elvis took an instant dislike to him. He pulled out a pistol and shot the television, obliterating the image of the crooning baritone. The Memphis Mafia guys, accustomed to this behavior, would simply sigh and make a note to order a new TV. It was just part of the cost of doing business with the king. This wasn't just about Robert Goulet. Any performer he felt was insincere or had no soul was a potential target. He also shot TVs when news reports about him came on that he didn't like. The television was a portal to the outside world, a world that constantly judged him, misunderstood him, and tried to capitalize on his fame. Shooting, it was a visceral, immediate way to shut that world out. It was an act of ultimate control. The image displeases me, so the image will be destroyed. The obsession with guns was a core part of his identity, especially in his later years. He had a massive collection of firearms, from handguns to machine guns. He often carried multiple guns on him at all times. They made him feel powerful and safe. For a man who was a prisoner of his own fame, unable to walk down the street, a gun was a tool that gave him a sense of agency. The act of shooting was a release of frustration. Think about the environment. Graceland was his fortress. Inside its walls, he was the absolute monarch. His whims were law. If he wanted to shoot a TV, nobody was going to stop him. In fact, they would enable him. His friends might laugh about it, but this behavior pointed to a deeper rage and impulsivity. It was a tantrum thrown by a man who had never been told no. Life outside Graceland had rules and consequences. Inside, Elvis made the rules. Linda Thompson, his girlfriend after Priscilla, recounted numerous stories of his impulsive violence. He would shoot lamps, furniture, and even cars. She told of a time he became frustrated with his Ferrari because it wouldn't start. He shot it. This wasn't just a funny quirk. It was a sign of a man whose frustrations were boiling over and whose only outlet was a destructive, childish act. He couldn't, lash out at the colonel. He couldn't lash out at his fans, so he lashed out at inanimate objects. The television, representing the entertainment industry that both made him and trapped him, was the perfect target. In final notes, was shooting a television a symbolic act of destroying the very industry that controlled his life? If he had been confronted about this destructive behavior, how would he have reacted? And how many televisions did Elvis actually destroy in his lifetime? Number 13, why did he love throwing firecrackers? Elvis Presley loved practical jokes. But his idea of a practical joke wasn't a whoopee cushion on a chair. It was often loud, startling, and involved pyrotechnics. He was obsessed with firecrackers. He would buy them in bulk, crates and crates of them, and use them to terrorize his friends, family, and employees. This wasn't just a youthful prank he outgrew. It continued throughout his life, becoming more elaborate and more dangerous. At Graceland, he would light entire packs of firecrackers and roll them under the chairs of snoozing members of the Memphis Mafia. He would throw them into rooms to wake people up. He would drop them from hotel windows in Las Vegas just to see the reaction from people below. For Elvis, the explosion and the subsequent panic were the height of comedy. His father, Vernon, was a frequent target. Vernon was notoriously frugal and serious, which made him the perfect foil for Elvis's pranks. Elvis would wire firecrackers to his father's office chair or hide them in his cigar boxes. The goal was always to get a big, startled reaction. He loved to break the quiet, to shatter the mundane. His life was a constant performance, and these pranks were a way to direct a small, chaotic scene where he was in complete control of the outcome. The obsession went beyond simple firecrackers. He escalated to M80s and other small explosives. The pranks became a way to test loyalty and to establish dominance within his group. If you could take the joke, you were in. If you got angry, you were on the outside. It was a strange and sometimes cruel way of managing his relationships. Joe Esposito, his right-hand man, wrote about these incidents, often with a tone that mixed amusement with exasperation. It's just another part of the job. This behavior reveals a man battling immense boredom. Imagine being Elvis Presley in the 1970s. You've done it all. The tours, the movies, the records. Now, you spend most of your time in a few isolated places. Graceland, a hotel suite in Vegas, a rented house in California. The days can be long and empty. The firecrackers were a way to inject some excitement, some adrenaline, into a monotonous existence. It was a manufactured crisis, a small burst of action in a life that was otherwise incredibly passive. There was also a clear power dynamic at play. Elvis was the king of his court. He could do things that no one else could. If one of the Memphis Mafia threw a firecracker at Elvis, they would have been fired, or worse. But he could do it to them with impunity. It was a constant reminder of who was in charge. It was a way for him to feel like a mischievous boy again, a boy who didn't have the weight of the world on his shoulders. But he wasn't a boy anymore. He was a powerful, isolated man, and his jokes had a sharp edge. The final notes. Did anyone ever get seriously hurt by these pyrotechnic pranks? Was his love for sudden, loud explosions a way of drowning out the silence and loneliness he felt? And what did this behavior say about his empathy for the people who were supposed to be his closest friends? Number 12. Why was a medical book his Bible? Elvis had a library of spiritual books, but one of his most read texts was not about God, it was about drugs. He was obsessed with the physician's desk reference, or PDR. This is a massive compendium of information on prescription drugs intended for doctors and pharmacists. For Elvis, it became a kind of Bible. He would study it for hours, memorizing the names of drugs, their uses, their side effects, and their recommended dosages. This obsession was deeply intertwined with his hypochondria and his escalating prescription drug use. He was convinced he had all sorts of ailments, from cancer to glaucoma. He surrounded himself with doctors who would cater to his demands, most notably Dr. George Nicopolis, known as Dr. Nick. Elvis would use the PDR to self-diagnose and then instruct his doctors on what to prescribe him. He wasn't just a patient, he saw himself as a medical expert. Members of the Memphis Mafia recall how Elvis would sit and read the PDR like a novel. He would talk about drugs with the same passion he once had for music. He knew the chemical compounds. He knew which pills were uppers, which were downers, and which were painkillers. He knew how they interacted. He would lecture his friends on their medical problems and suggest what they should be taking. He had a case, like a doctor's bag, filled with vials and bottles, all meticulously organized. The book was a tool of control. His body was failing him. He was overweight, his health was declining, and he was exhausted. The PDR gave him a sense of power over his own biology. If he could understand the medicine, he believed he could manage his pain, his insomnia, and his moods. He could be his own doctor, he could concoct his own perfect cocktail of drugs to get him through the day, or to get him on stage for a show. The irony is staggering. The very book that contained all the warnings about the dangers of these drugs became his enabler. He would read about the side effects and the risks of addiction, yet he seemed to believe he was immune. He saw the drugs not as a problem, but as the solution. According to the 1981 book Elvis: The Final Years by Jerry Hopkins, Dr. Nick prescribed Elvis thousands of doses of various drugs in the last couple of years of his life alone. The PDR was Elvis's justification for it all. He wasn't a junkie, he was a student of pharmacology. This obsession shows a man in a state of profound denial. He was intellectually engaged with the substances that were killing him. He could discuss them with clinical detachment, but he could not, or would not, see the reality of his own addiction. The PDR gave him a false sense of security. It was a shield of medical jargon and scientific knowledge that protected him from the simple, terrible truth: he was a drug addict and he was dying. His body was found on August 16, 1977, surrounded by medical books and prescription bottles. Final notes. Did Elvis's deep knowledge of the PDR make his addiction even more dangerous, allowing him to push the limits further than someone with less information? Did Dr. Nick and his other physicians feel intimidated by Elvis's self-proclaimed expertise? And was there a specific passage or drug in the PDR that he returned to again and again? Number 11. What was he hiding behind one-way mirrors? Graceland was Elvis's sanctuary, but it was also a place of intense surveillance. He was obsessed with watching people. One of the strangest manifestations of this was his use of one-way mirrors. He had them installed in his home, allowing him to observe what was happening in other rooms without being seen himself. The most famous example was at his house in California. He had a one-way mirror set up so he could watch the women who would audition to be part of his entourage or his romantic life. He could sit in a hidden room and observe them as they talked and interacted with his friends, judging them from a safe, invisible distance. It was a way to exert ultimate control and to satisfy his paranoia. He could see their true selves, or so he believed, when they didn't know the king was watching. This wasn't just about auditioning potential girlfriends. At Graceland, he had a sophisticated security system with cameras covering the grounds. He could sit in his bedroom, which he called his office, and watch the monitors for hours. He would watch the guards at the gate, the fans who gathered outside, and the movements of his own staff. He was the all-seeing eye of his own small kingdom. This obsession with watching stems from a deep-seated paranoia and distrust that developed over years of fame. He was surrounded by people, but he never knew who he could truly trust. Were they there for him or for the money and the fame? The one-way mirrors and security cameras were his way of trying to find out. By observing people when they were unaware, he thought he could catch them in a moment of insincerity or betrayal. It also speaks to his profound isolation. He was a spectator in his own life. He couldn't go out and interact with the world like a normal person, so he brought the world to him and watched it from behind a screen or a special piece of glass. He was like a director watching a play unfold, a play in which he was the main character but could no longer participate in the action. It was a safe way to feel connected to people without the risk of actual human interaction. Priscilla Presley wrote about this aspect of his personality. He was constantly testing people's loyalty. The surveillance was part of that. He created an environment where everyone knew they might be being watched at any time. This kept them on edge and reinforced his position as the one in power. He controlled the flow of information. He knew things that others didn't. This knowledge was a form of currency in the closed ecosystem of Graceland. The man who was the most watched person in the world became the ultimate watcher. Final notes? Who installed these one-way mirrors, and were they ever asked to keep it a secret? Did any of the women who were being observed ever find out? And what was their reaction? And did Elvis ever see something through his mirrors or on his cameras that confirmed his deepest fears about betrayal? Number 10. Why did he want Priscilla to look just so? Elvis was a man obsessed with control, and nowhere was this more evident than in his relationship with Priscilla. When they met in Germany in 1959, she was a 14-year-old schoolgirl. He was 24, a global superstar. From the very beginning, he began to mold her into his ideal woman. This went far beyond simple preferences. It was a complete aesthetic overhaul. In her book, Elvis and Me, Priscilla details this process with startling honesty. Elvis dictated every aspect of her appearance. He had her dye her brown hair jet black to match his own. He insisted she wear it in a high bouffant, also mirroring his pompadour. He chose her clothes. She was not allowed to wear prints. He preferred solid primary colors. He disliked the color brown on her because it reminded him of his army uniform. He picked out her dresses, often sending one of his guys to the store with her to ensure she bought what he wanted. The control extended to her makeup. He taught her how to apply it, insisting on heavy eyeliner and false eyelashes to make her blue eyes stand out. And he wanted her to wear makeup at all times, even when she was just at home. He would tell her that he wanted to be able to wake up in the middle of the night and see her looking perfect. She became a living doll, crafted to his exact specifications. This wasn't born of malice, at least not in a straightforward way. In his mind, he was improving her. He was making her beautiful. He was turning her into the perfect companion for the king of rock and roll. He had a very specific image of femininity, one that was frozen in the late 1950s and early 1960s. As the world changed and fashions evolved, he insisted that Priscilla maintain this classic, highly stylized look. She was not allowed to cut her hair. She was not allowed to look natural. This obsession reveals a deep-seated insecurity and a need for a stable, predictable world. His own life was chaotic. His image was constantly being analyzed and criticized. By controlling Priscilla's appearance, he could create one small part of his world that was perfect and unchanging. She was his creation, a reflection of his own taste. Her look reinforced his own identity. They were a matching set, the king and his queen, both with black hair, striking eyes, and a look that set them apart from ordinary people. For Priscilla, this was an immense pressure. She was a young woman trying to discover her own identity, but she was only allowed to have the identity Elvis gave her. She wrote that she never let him see her without makeup on. She never let him see her getting dressed. She had to maintain the illusion at all times. It was only after she left him in 1972 that she was able to find her own style, cutting her hair and adopting a more natural look. It was a powerful act of reclaiming her own self. Final notes. Did Elvis ever express a reason for his specific aesthetic demands beyond simple preference? How did the other members of the Memphis Mafia view this transformation of Priscilla? And if she had refused to change her appearance, would the relationship have ever happened? Number 9. What was so special about the number 8? Elvis had a strange relationship with numbers, but one number held a special significance for him, the number 8. He saw it everywhere, and he attached a deep mystical importance to it. This was part of his broader obsession with numerology, the belief that numbers have a spiritual vibration and meaning. His interest in numerology began in earnest in the 1960s, fueled by the spiritual books he was reading. He learned that in numerology, you can find your life path number by adding up the digits of your birth date. Elvis was born on January 8th, 1935. When you add the digits of the month in day 1 plus 8, you get 9. When you add the digits of the year 1 plus 9 plus 3 plus 5, you get 18. When you add those two results, 9 plus 18, you get 27. And when you add the final digits 2 plus 7, you get 9. So his life path number was 9. But it was the number of his birthday, the 8th, that truly captivated him. He began to see the number 8 everywhere in his life. He pointed out to his friends that his name, Elvis Presley, has 12 letters and 1 plus 2 is 3. His father's name, Vernon Presley, also has 12 letters. And his mother's name, Gladys Presley, has 12 letters. The three of them together made 9, his life path number. But he would always find a way back to 8. He was particularly fascinated by the fact that the 8th letter of the alphabet is H. He would look for words starting with H or for patterns of 8 in addresses, phone numbers, and license plates. This wasn't just a passive observation, it influenced his decisions. He would look for the number 8 as a sign that he was on the right path or that a particular venture would be successful. It was a form of confirmation bias. He was looking for order and meaning in a chaotic world, and numbers provided a seemingly logical framework. If the universe was communicating through numbers and the number 8 kept appearing, then it must be a sign that he was special, that he was being guided. The shape of the number 8 itself was also significant to him. It is the symbol for infinity when turned on its side. For a man obsessed with spirituality, eternal life, and his own legacy, the concept of infinity was powerful. The number represented a connection to something beyond the material world. It was a constant, a perfect loop, in a life full of ups and downs. This obsession shows a mind that was desperately searching for patterns. Fame is isolating. It can make you feel like you are the only person in the world going through your particular experience. Numerology, and his focus on the number 8, was a way to feel connected to a larger cosmic plan. It wasn't just random chance that he was born on the 8th. It was destiny. This belief provided comfort and a sense of purpose when his life felt directionless. It was another layer of control, a way to decode the mystery of his own existence. Final notes. Did Elvis ever make a major financial or career decision based solely on the appearance of the number 8? Were there other numbers that he was actively hostile towards? And did his belief in numerology ever conflict with his Christian faith in his own mind? Number 8, why did he need to rent out? Amusement parks and theaters. Elvis couldn't go to the movies. He couldn't go to an amusement park. If he tried, he would be mobbed. His solution was simple. If extravagant, he would rent the entire place out for the night. This became a regular ritual, a way for him and his entourage to experience a sliver of normal life, but on a grand, completely abnormal scale. The most famous example was the Memphian Theater. It was his local movie house. Whenever he was in Memphis and wanted to see a film, his staff would call the theater after the last public showing. Elvis and his crew would arrive late at night, often with a group of friends and girlfriends. The theater staff would run the projector just for them. They could talk during the movie, get up and walk around, and eat whatever they wanted. It was their private playground. He would sometimes watch 2 or 3 movies in a single night, staying until dawn. He did the same thing with amusement parks. He would rent out the entire Libertyland amusement park in Memphis From midnight until sunrise, Elvis and his friends had the run of the place. They could ride the roller coasters and other attractions as many times as they wanted with no lines and no crowds. Jerry Schilling and other members of his circle have described these nights as surreal. They were moments of pure childlike joy, a temporary escape from the pressures of being Elvis. This obsession wasn't just about having fun, it was about creating a controlled environment where he could relax. In public, he always had to be Elvis. He had to be aware of how he looked, what he said, and who was watching him. In the rented-out theater or amusement park, surrounded only by his trusted inner circle, he could let his guard down. He could be himself, he could laugh loudly, he could be silly, he could be a normal 30-something guy hanging out with his friends. But the practice also highlighted his profound isolation. He was buying a simulation of a normal life. Real people go to the movies with a crowd, they wait in line for the roller coaster. They are part of the shared human experience. Elvis was cut off from that. His solution was to create a hermetically sealed private version of it. It was fun, but it was also a sad reminder of everything he had lost. He was an outsider looking in, so he bought the whole building just so he could sit inside for a few hours. These private rentals were incredibly expensive, but money was no object. He was willing to pay any price for a few hours of freedom. It shows how desperate he was for these simple pleasures. It also reinforced the power dynamic of his group. He was the benefactor, the one who made these magical nights possible. Everyone there was his guest living in his world on his time. It was a generous act, but it also kept him firmly at the center of his own universe. Final notes. What was the single most expensive venue Elvis ever rented out for a night? Did the employees who had to stay and work all night resent it, or were they thrilled to be part of the king's world? And in those empty amusement parks, surrounded by the laughter of his friends, did he ever feel more alone than ever? Number 7. Why did he demand his bacon be burnt? Elvis had very specific and unchangeable tastes in food. His love for fried peanut butter and banana sandwiches is legendary. But his other culinary obsessions reveal even more about his personality. One of the most rigid rules in the Graceland kitchen was about his bacon. It had to be burnt. Not just crispy, it had to be cooked until it was black and brittle. The Graceland cook, Mary Jenkins, worked for Elvis for 14 years. In interviews, she described his eating habits in detail. He wanted his bacon deep fried in a skillet until it was completely blackened. If it came to him with any hint of pink or chewiness, he would send it back. He would eat entire platters of this burnt bacon, often alongside other calorie-laden favorites like cheeseburgers, mashed potatoes, and gravy. This wasn't just a preference, it was a demand. The food he ate was one of the few things he could completely control. He couldn't control the press, he couldn't control the demands of his career. But he could control exactly how his bacon was cooked. This rigidity extended to other foods as well. He wanted his cheeseburgers cooked a certain way, he wanted his biscuits fresh and hot. The Graceland kitchen was on call 24 hours a day to satisfy his cravings, whatever they might be, and they had to be made to his exact specifications. The obsession with burnt bacon points to his southern upbringing. Simple, hearty, and often fried food was his comfort. In a life that had become incredibly complex and artificial, the taste of home was a powerful anchor. But the extremity of the demand, the need for it to be burnt, suggests something more. It's a texture and a taste that is absolute. There is no ambiguity in burnt bacon. It is what it is. It's a hard, crunchy, salty flavor, an extreme sensory input. This can be seen as a reflection of his all-or-nothing personality. Elvis didn't do things by halves. He loved extravagantly, he got angry explosively, he ate voraciously, he wanted intense experiences, and that extended to his food. The subtlety of a perfectly cooked piece of bacon was lost on him. He wanted the extreme version. It was a way of feeling something definite and strong. His diet, of course, contributed significantly to his health problems in his later years. The high-fat, high-calorie, and high-sodium meals were a form of self-medication, a way to soothe his anxieties and fill an emotional void. The burnt bacon was a small but telling part of a much larger pattern of consumption. He was consuming food, drugs, and material goods in a desperate attempt to find satisfaction. But the satisfaction was always fleeting, leading him to need more and to need it in more extreme forms. A final notes. Did anyone in his circle ever try to get him to eat healthier, and what was his reaction? Was the burnt bacon a childhood memory or a taste he developed later in life? And how many pounds of bacon were consumed at Graceland in a typical week? Number 6. What was the meaning behind TCB and TLC? In 1970, Elvis Presley was flying back to Memphis with Priscilla. He was in a philosophical mood, talking about his life and career. He suddenly had an idea. He grabbed a piece of stationery and drew a logo, a lightning bolt set against the letters TCB. It stood for taking care of business. It became his personal motto, his mantra for the rest of his life. This was more than just a cool-sounding phrase, it was an entire philosophy. For Elvis, taking care of business meant professionalism, dedication, and getting things done right now. It was a commitment to excellence in his work and a code of conduct for the people around him. He had custom gold necklaces made with the TCB logo for himself and the members of the Memphis Mafia. To receive a TCB necklace was to be officially accepted into his inner circle. It was a symbol of loyalty and trust. The logo itself was symbolic, the lightning bolt represented in a flash. It meant speed and direct action. No procrastination, no excuses. If something needed to be done, it was done immediately. This was how he wanted to run his life and his organization. He saw himself as the leader of a dedicated team, and the TCB logo was their uniform, their coat of arms. Soon after, he created a female version of the logo for the women in his life, including Priscilla and his other girlfriends. This one featured a lightning bolt next to the letters TLC, which stood for tender loving care. This neatly summed up his view of gender roles. The men were to take care of business, to be men of action. The women were to provide tender loving care, to be nurturing and supportive. It was a very traditional and controlling worldview. The men worked for him, the women were there for his comfort. The TCB and TLC logos were everywhere. They were on his private jet, the Lisa Marie. They were on his jewelry. They were on his stationery. They were even incorporated into the design of the Jungle Room at Graceland. The symbol became inextricably linked with his late career persona. It was a brand, a way of signaling his seriousness and his power. But the obsession with the TCB motto also reveals a man trying to impose order on a life that was slipping into chaos. By the 1970s, his health was declining, his marriage was falling apart, and he was growing tired of the creative compromises he had to make. The TCB philosophy was a way to fight back against this entropy. It was a declaration that he was still in charge, still the sharp, focused professional. It was an ideal to strive for, even as his personal life failed to live up to it. The reality was that his business was often handled poorly by others, and his personal life was a mess. The TCB necklace was a constant, shiny reminder of how things were supposed to be. Final notes, did any member of the Memphis Mafia ever lose their TCB necklace, and what was the consequence? Was the TLC concept his idea alone, or did Priscilla or someone else contribute to it? And how did Elvis define taking care of business in the final, drug-hazed year of his life? Number 5. Why did he surround himself with gemstones? Elvis loved jewelry. He was famous for his diamond rings, gold chains, and elaborate, custom-made pieces. But his obsession went beyond simple adornment. He was fascinated by the gemstones themselves, believing they held special powers and energies. This was another extension of his deep dive into spiritual and mystical beliefs. He believed that different stones had different properties. Diamonds represented purity and power. The opals were for creativity. Sapphires were for wisdom. He would choose his jewelry for the day based on the kind of energy he wanted to attract. He would give his friends jewelry with specific stones, telling them what the stones were for. It was a way of bestowing a blessing or a kind of magical protection on them. His interest was particularly focused on large, impressive stones. He had a famous lion's head ring with diamonds for eyes. He had massive rings with clusters of black sapphires and diamonds. He wore heavy pendants and chains, not just as a fashion statement, but as a kind of spiritual armor. He felt that the stones protected him from negative energy, both from the outside world and from within himself. This belief was heavily influenced by the books he was reading on esoteric subjects. Many New Age and occult traditions ascribe specific meanings and powers to crystals and gemstones. Elvis embraced these ideas wholeheartedly. He would hold a stone in his hand while meditating. He would talk to his friends about the vibrations of different gems. For him, a diamond wasn't just a compressed piece of carbon, it was a conduit for divine energy. This obsession also tied into his image as a king. Royalty wears jewels. They are symbols of wealth, status, and power. Elvis's stage costumes in the 1970s became increasingly ornate, covered in rhinestones and studs to mimic the sparkle of real gems. The jewelry was an essential part of the larger-than-life persona he presented to the world. It helped create the image of a modern-day monarch, someone set apart from ordinary mortals. But there was a more personal, almost superstitious element to it. He seemed to genuinely believe in the protective qualities of the gems. In a world where he felt constantly under threat from crazed fans, from critics, from his own inner demons, the hard, beautiful, and supposedly powerful stones were a source of comfort. They were tangible objects he could touch and see, a physical representation of the spiritual protection he so desperately craved. He was weighing himself down with golden diamonds, perhaps in an attempt to keep from floating away into the confusion of his own mind. Final notes. Was there one specific gemstone that Elvis believed was the most powerful of all? Did he ever claim that a piece of jewelry had actively protected him from harm? And what is the total estimated value of the jewelry collection he owned at the time of his death? Number 4. What did he see in his mother's grave? The most important person in Elvis Presley's life was his mother, Gladys. Her death in 1958, at the age of 46, was the single most devastating event of his life. He never fully recovered from it. His obsession with her memory was profound and, at times, disturbing. This was most evident in his relationship with her final resting place. Gladys was initially buried in the Memphis Forest Hill Cemetery. Elvis would visit her grave frequently, especially late at night. He would sit and talk to her for hours, as if she were still there. He would have conversations with her, seeking her advice and her comfort. This was his way of keeping her close, of refusing to let her go. He felt her presence most strongly at the gravesite. His grief was overwhelming and often public. At her funeral, he threw himself over her casket, crying uncontrollably, "Oh God, everything I have is gone." For the rest of his life, he was searching for a replacement for his mother's unconditional love. He often dated women who had a maternal quality, but no one could ever fill the void she left. The obsession took a strange turn. He had a microphone installed at her grave, wired to the house at Graceland. The initial purpose is debated. Some say it was part of a security system to prevent vandalism. But others, including some close to him, believed it was so he could listen to her. This detail, though it sounds like something from a Gothic novel, speaks to the depth of his inability to accept her death. He was trying to bridge the gap between the world of the living and the world of the dead, to maintain a literal connection to her. After Elvis's own death in 1977, there was an attempt to steal his body from its tomb at Forest Hill. Following this security breach, Vernon Presley had the bodies of both Elvis and Gladys moved to Graceland. They were reinterred in the Meditation Garden, a small, peaceful area on the property that Elvis had created. Today, the Meditation Garden is the final stop on the Graceland tour. Millions of fans have filed past the graves of Elvis, his parents, and his grandmother. In a way, Elvis finally got what he wanted. He is buried right next to his beloved mother, and their graves are tended to and protected on the grounds of their home. His obsession with her final resting place led to the creation of one of the most famous burial sites in the world. He ensured that neither he nor his mother would ever be alone again. Final notes. Is the story of the microphone at Gladys's original grave definitively true, or has it become part of the Elvis mythology? Did Elvis ever talk to others about what he heard from his mother during his graveside visits? And how did his obsession with his deceased mother affect his ability to form healthy relationships with other women? Number 3. Why was he obsessed with the color blue? Elvis loved the color blue. But this was more than a favorite color. It was an aesthetic that dominated parts of his life and his home. He was particularly obsessed with a specific combination blue and white. This can be seen most clearly in the decor of certain rooms at Graceland. When you think of Graceland, you might think of the green shag carpets of the jungle room or the pristine white of the living room. But upstairs in his private quarters, blue was a dominant theme. His bedroom and office were decorated in shades of blue. This was his inner sanctum, the place where he spent most of his time in his later years. The choice of blue for this personal space was significant. Blue is often associated with calmness, serenity, and peace. For a man whose life was anything but calm, surrounding himself with this color may have been an attempt to create a tranquil environment. It was a visual retreat from the chaos of his fame, but blue can also be associated with melancholy and sadness, the blues. Given Elvis's struggles with depression and loneliness, it's impossible not to see a double meaning in his choice. His blue room was both a sanctuary and, perhaps, a reflection of his inner state. The obsession went beyond decor. He had blue cars, he sang Blue Suede Shoes, Blue Moon of Kentucky, and Blue Christmas. While he didn't write these songs, his iconic performances made them his own. The color became part of his brand. He looked good in blue, it complemented his black hair, and most famously his blue eyes. However, his relationship with the color was also controlling. Just as he disliked Priscilla wearing the color brown, he had strong opinions about how blue should be used. He preferred solid blues over patterns. He liked the stark contrast of blue and white. This aesthetic precision is another example of his need to control his environment. He was curating his world, and in his world, blue was a primary color of choice. The obsession is a subtle one compared to some of his others, but it's revealing. It shows a man with a highly developed, if rigid, visual sense. He knew what he liked, and he wanted to be surrounded by it. The color blue was a constant in his life. It was the color of his first big hits subject matter. It was the color of his eyes, a feature that drove his fans wild, and it was the color he chose for the room where he spent his final hours. It was a color that represented both his public image and his private sorrow. Final notes. Was there a specific shade of blue that Elvis was most drawn to, such as royal blue or navy? Did he ever express a dislike for any other specific colors? And did his focus on the color blue influence the fashion or design choices of any of his fans at the time? Number 2, what did he see in his dead twin? On January 8th, 1935, in a small 2-room house in Tupelo, Mississippi, Gladys Presley gave birth to twin boys. And the first, Jesse Garon Presley, was stillborn. About 35 minutes later, the second twin, Elvis Aaron Presley, was born, healthy and crying. This event, the death of his twin brother, before he ever took a breath, haunted Elvis for his entire life. He was obsessed with the brother he never knew. Elvis grew up as an only child, but he always felt the presence of a missing other half. His parents, particularly Gladys, often spoke of Jesse. They believed that when one twin died, the surviving twin received all the strength, talent, and spirit of the other. Elvis was told he had the energy of 2 people. This became a core part of his personal mythology. He wasn't just Elvis, he was Elvis and Jesse. This belief had a profound psychological impact. It contributed to a sense of survivor's guilt. Why did he live and his brother die? It also fueled his sense of destiny. He felt he had to live for 2 people to achieve enough success for both himself and his lost twin. This immense pressure may have been a driving force behind his incredible ambition. He wasn't just trying to make a name for himself, he was trying to honor the memory of a brother he never met. He would talk to Jesse. Late at night, he would have conversations with his twin, just as he would later have with his deceased mother. He would visit Jesse's unmarked grave in Tupelo. He felt a deep spiritual connection to him. In the book Elvis and Me, Priscilla Presley describes how Elvis would talk about Jesse, wondering what he would have been like and feeling his presence, especially during difficult times. Jesse was his invisible companion, his guardian angel. The obsession also manifested in his search for a brother. He surrounded himself with the Memphis Mafia, a group of men who became his surrogate family. He was looking for the camaraderie and loyalty he imagined he would have had with Jesse. He needed to have his guys around him at all times, creating a buffer against the loneliness he felt. This deep-seated feeling of being alone, of being fundamentally incomplete, started on the day he was born. Biographer Peter Guralnick argues that the death of Jesse is central to understanding Elvis's entire personality, his spirituality, his loneliness, his neediness, and his sense of a special, almost divine purpose. He was the chosen one, the one who survived. This belief could be empowering, but it was also an incredible burden. The ghost of his twin brother was a constant presence, a reminder of what he had lost and what he felt he had to live up to. He was one half of a whole, forever searching for his missing part. Final notes. Did Elvis ever consider naming one of his own children after Jesse? How did his father Vernon talk about the stillborn twin, and did it differ from Gladys's approach? And if Jesse Garon had lived, is it possible the world would have never known Elvis Presley as we do today? Number 1. What did he hear in the sound of his own voice? Elvis Presley's greatest gift was his voice. It was an instrument of incredible range, power, and emotion. But his relationship with it was complex and obsessive. He was both its master and its servant. He was obsessed with the sound he could produce, and he spent his life trying to perfect it, understand it, and control it. From a young age, he was fascinated by sound. He would listen to the radio, absorbing everything from country to blues to gospel. When he first recorded at Sun Studio in 1954, Sam Phillips was not just impressed by his vocal quality, but by his intuitive understanding of acoustics. Elvis knew how to use the microphone. He knew how his voice sounded in a room. He would ask for playback again and again, not out of vanity, but out of a deep need to analyze what he was hearing. He was his own most dedicated student and his own harshest critic. This obsession continued throughout his career. In the recording studio, he was known for his tireless work ethic. He would do take after take, long after everyone else was satisfied, searching for the perfect emotional delivery. He was chasing a sound that he heard in his head. He would experiment with his phrasing, his pitch, and his tone. He wasn't just singing the words, he was trying to inhabit the song completely. His love for gospel music was central to this. Gospel was where he felt he could truly let his voice soar, free from the commercial constraints of rock and roll or pop ballads. He would gather his friends and bandmates late at night, after a show or a recording session, and sing gospel songs until dawn. These informal jam sessions, which were documented in recordings like the $1 Million Quartet session with Johnny Cash, Carl Perkins, and Jerry Lewis, were not for an audience. They were for him. It was a form of spiritual release, a way to connect with the source of his talent. In his later years, as his physical health declined, his voice remained remarkably powerful. But he grew more insecure about it. He was terrified of losing it. He had a humidifier running constantly to protect his vocal cords. He followed a specific diet before shows. He was acutely aware that his voice was the foundation of everything. Without it, he was nothing. This obsession with his own voice reveals the core of his identity. And he was a singer. That is who he was. The movies, the fame, the money, it was all secondary to the act of singing. His voice was the one thing that was truly his, the one thing he could control and shape. It was his connection to God, his gift to the world, and his own private comfort. When he was singing, especially in an intimate setting, all the chaos of his life seemed to fade away. There was only the sound, the pure, perfect sound he could create. It was the one part of himself he truly, unconditionally loved. Final notes. Was there a specific recording of his own that Elvis considered to be his most perfect vocal performance? Did he ever suffer from a vocal injury that caused him to fear his career was over? And in the final moments of his life, what song might have been playing in the echo chamber of his memory?